Hello,
Hello,
what's your name?
my name is Richard DeLong.
What do you do for a job?
I do a lot of different things because I've been self-employed for the past 16 to 17 years, but my main source of income is conference interpreting.
Very nice. What languages do you speak and how many of them do you use for work?
So I speak 9 different languages at different levels. At a native or essentially native level, English and Russian, and then Ukrainian, Polish, Slovak, which are also Slavic languages, German, um, Spanish, French, and Georgian. I
Very
think I
nice.
didn't miss any. Now, for my work as an interpreter, I currently use only English and Russian, although I have the possibility of beginning to interpret from Georgian into English and Russian. But it would take many, many more years probably to begin to interpret into Georgian. So I might add Georgian, but as an interpreter, I currently only use English and Russian.
Do you use your languages for other jobs you do?
Yes, interpreting is the main thing I do, at least commercially. But in the past, I've also worked as a translator extensively, and there I used Russian and Ukrainian, and English, of course. Uh, I've done lots of other type of language work as well, some editing, uh, which frankly I hate. I hate editing. It's much worse than translating. I have also taken on some random jobs like showing some people around or acting as a fixer, which is a kind of mix between a local expert and a translator interpreter. And I have taken a couple different groups of people on hiking trips, multi-day hiking trips in Georgia, where I've had to speak Polish or German. So if you look at, I think it'll be interesting for your viewers to know that the better you know, the better you know a language, the more money you're going to make on it. And I once did an analysis of how much income I'd gotten from different languages, and Russian was by far the greatest, many more times greater than any of the others. Next was Ukrainian, and then it just dropped off very, very quickly. So the vast majority of what I do uses Russian.
Oh, very good. Very interesting, really. um, and so you think it's possible to make languages the main way of supporting oneself?
Definitely. I mean, there are language teachers, tutors, translators, interpreters. There's plenty of work for all of these fields, although they are changing as well because of the internet and because so many people are learning English. Many people are finding that the salaries for language teachers are dropping in many cases. I used to be able to I made $20 or even $25 per hour during a brief period of time when I taught English in Ukraine about 10 years ago. And even with inflation and everything, you can't make that money today. Many people are discovering the same thing, and even translating rates have dropped.
Do you think it's due to the fact that many people speak English, so the services are less needed, or it's because so what do you think? What is the reason for that?
I think that's the first reason. The second is that many more people speak an advanced English at an advanced level, and so that type of translation is usually good enough. And because so many people speak English now as a non-native language, it's not as critical as people used to think it was for text to be in perfect American or British English. And so there's kind of a new international English that's being formed, and also the increasing quality of Google Translate. So many agencies and clients are trying try to save money these days by doing a quick translation using even Google Translate or a local translator, a non-native, and then paying pennies to have the text edited by a native.
Editing takes more time sometimes. If it's written, but if it's badly written, it takes ages. Yeah, no, don't you?
That is true, and that's why I hate editing. But I'm also a perfectionist, and I've seen other people's editing work, and I see that many people are able to. They aren't as perfectionist about a design. I'm a writer, so I just can't leave things until they're the way that I would write them. So I'm not the best editor.
A question. You just mentioned that you're a writer. What do you write about?
So I write extensively in English and Russian, and I've been writing for the past 16 or 17 years. Originally, the first things that I started writing for the web, writing online, were about Ukraine, and then later I wrote, I had a blog on psychological topics. I then created my first Russian language website in 2007 and began writing about backpacking and equipment and trips in Russian. And this evolved over the years, and now I've moved on to books. I'm working on a very long book project now. Mm-hmm. My first book had to do with language learning, and maybe we can include a link to that if anyone is interested. Yeah. But I wrote that in English and Russian and published both versions. Now I'm writing basically a psychological adventure novel in Russian.
Very interesting, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's not commercial, but yeah, of course, it's intimately related to language learning and languages, of course.
What do you mean by it's not commercial? So that you don't sell it, or just that you cannot make enough money out of it, or what do you mean by that?
Well, it's not commercial till the book is published and people begin buying it. Yeah. So, and the book that I've written, I mean, it just can't compare in terms of income to my interpreting activities. So you could call it a side project, unless I decide to commit to making it really is a question of commitment, turning that into a real project with all the marketing activities, all the videos that I'd need to do to really let people know about what I'm doing and my system and methods and so forth. But I haven't made that commitment.
Not at all. So have you tried to market it or not at all?
Only in very limited ways.
Okay. In your opinion, what are the biggest obstacles you have had to overcome, or things you had to learn along the way to get to the point where you are now?
Well, I have been able to interpret for 20 years, but I only broke into the interpreting field 4 years ago. So it's a very closed profession, and because I didn't attend an interpreting academy or grow up within the interpreting community in, say, Ukraine, I didn't have those connections. People didn't know about me, and I had the impression that in Ukraine, at least, everyone needed Ukrainian, not Russian. And so I really didn't make any active attempts to break into that market. And I really got lucky 4 years ago. I think everyone has a couple professional breakthroughs in their lives. And this was one of them. Through a friend, I met one of the top conference interpreters here in Georgia, certainly one of the most respected. And she took a liking to me and basically brought me into the profession, started giving me work and working in the booth with me. And that's how I got into the field. But otherwise, it's very difficult to break into if you come from a non-standard background. Okay. But on the other hand, I have a great advantage over all local interpreters, and that I'm in that English is my native language. and I'm constantly using Russian in a country where Russian is widely spoken. So compare that to the local interpreters who are basically practicing their English only during work assignments. And the vast majority of them have not had the chance to live abroad in England or anywhere else where English is spoken. But despite this advantage that I haven't met any other non-local interpreters in all my years in Eastern Europe. Except one, I should mention one Spanish man who moved to Georgia many, many years ago and gets the very rare Spanish interpreting assignments where he works between Spanish, Georgian, and Russian. So it's a strange situation. You would think that someone with native English would have a great advantage, but in this part of the world, I just haven't met any native English interpreters.
And from the point of view of, let's say, your personal skills, what did help you the most to get to the point where you are? Like more self-discipline or working on your ideas every day?
Okay, actually, it was a period of 2 years where I obsessively studied and used Russian daily from morning to night for 2 years. And I think in hindsight, it was also important the manner in which I studied, learned the language, because it wasn't my first experience learning a foreign language through immersion, but it was the first time that I mastered vocabulary so thoroughly. So I would check the exact meaning of every word. And as I did this, I didn't realize it, but I was establishing very precise connections between phrases in English and phrases in Russian. And having these connections is essential to becoming a high-level interpreter or translator. If you just go to another country and live there, go to school there, and so forth, there's no guarantee that you will establish those connections between your native language and the target language. So I would say in my case, it was 2 years of dedicated work doing very little else and learning the language in a way that established very clear connections between the two languages.
Did you have to work at the time, or could you just concentrate on Russian?
I was working in a way, but it was proselytizing work, missionary work.
Oh.
So my work was actually to talk to people. So I was immersed in the language on the one hand, and I had enough time to be able to practice it and study it and learn about everything I was interested in.
Very nice. So, do you have any tips for someone who aspires to turn their passion for languages into a real job?
I have a mixed impression of the possibilities. On the one hand, it's a struggle, and I think people need to be aware of that. If your passion for languages involves English, then I think the opportunities now are virtually endless. It's easier, I think, for someone who has a passion for English to make something of their language skills than someone who has a passion for, say, French. If your passion is for English, you can do something with that literally in any country of the world. If your passion is for French, more and more, even a language like French, that used to be the international language of diplomacy, is becoming the local language of French people. So to make something of your passion for French, that inevitably means that you need to go live in France. Maybe after that, after you've spent some time there and really enculturated yourself, then maybe you can go to another country and use your French skills in a non-French context. So that's one thing I think to keep in mind. You need to spend some time in the target country and really become enculturated. there's also a big difference between a motivation to integrate into a culture and a motivation to simply assimilate the language for work or other more specific reasons. So I think it's good to realize, do you really want to, again, talking about French, do you really want to become part of the French culture? Do you see yourself living in France, being surrounded by French people? Or do you think French is a cool language that would be awesome to know? You have always enjoyed speaking French, or maybe you need French for a job. So if you can distinguish between those two motivations, I think that's important. In the first case, you really need to find a way to go live in a French-speaking environment. In the second case, on the one hand, you have more freedom to study the language any way you want. On the other hand, on average, you're going to have less success than someone who really wants to integrate into the culture. So I would, another bit of advice is that although you may be tempted to learn 5 or even 10 languages, probably the majority of your income is going to come through 1 or 2. So as in my case, I know to different degrees 9 languages, but it really would be enough for me to know just 2, English and Russian. And maybe my life wouldn't change so much if I didn't know those other 7, because I'd still be able to work as a conference interpreter. I'd still be writing in both of those languages. I'd still be integrated into the Russian-speaking culture. So it's like like Pareto's law. You get 80% of the results from 20% of the effort, or 20% of the languages. So I think it's better to know 1 language really well than 10 languages at a conversational level in terms of career development.
Mm-hmm. And all these other languages have helped you somehow to reach the point where you are now. So not in the sense of, like, probably not monetary sense, but do you feel that knowing other languages, I don't know, made you special, so people were interested in what you did, or maybe got you to talk to people you wouldn't have talked otherwise?
Definitely. But I still view them as hobbies compared to my interest in Russian. But through these other languages, I've met a ton of different people. I've created the Tbilisi Language Exchange Club, which involves hundreds of different people speaking, not hundreds, but a dozen or more different languages, and they meet on a regular basis, and I'm in charge of that. So I meet these people. I get to speak different languages on a weekly basis in a natural environment. So of course it's wonderful. I wouldn't give it up, but I recognize that compared to my integrative interest in Russian, these other languages are simply hobbies and fun ways to spend the time and meet other people.
My last question, what is the, okay, probably you talked about that in your book, but what is what is one way you like to learn a language? So you don't have to explain everything, but just something which you think that really got you to speak your languages very well, apart from, of course, being in the country and talking to people and being integrated.
Well, you say apart from talking to people, but I think that really is the number one secret. Anyone who currently is fluent in a language is also currently talking to people in that language. So there is really no way to get fluent without spending tons of time talking to people. So when I look at different people, 90% of language learners have the same problem, which is a lack of conversation practice. So if you can start with that, then I think that solves most of the issues that come along. And then secondary to that is the specific method in which you study language. And I think different things work for people. I have my method, which I outline in my book. Some people can do online courses. I personally basically, I dislike anything other than my personal method of language, which is maybe typical of polyglots who have been doing this for many years. So I can't stand, for example, language courses. I can do language tutoring, but but only if the tutor does what I want. So they can't come with their instruction method or instruction program. Basically, we're just going to sit and talk, and I'm going to lead the discussion. They're going to do most of the listening. I'm going to ask questions from time to time, but it's really nothing more than a conversation where I'm taking notes. So they come, they aren't doing anything, and they wonder, what am I getting paid for? I'm supposed to be teaching something. But then after the lesson, I take a little bit of time, 20, maximum 30 minutes, and process my notes, and then make a recording, and then I listen to the notes later before the next lesson. So, but aside from all of that, the most important thing is making sure that you have people to speak to. In fact, that can even be simplified further. Do you have one person in your life, at least one person, who expects to speak with you in a particular language at least once a week? And I think if you answer no to that question, then you're always going to be vulnerable to a loss of your language skills. If you can say yes to that, then you no longer have to try so hard. You no longer have to keep looking for practice opportunities or paying for courses online or whatever. So trying to get that one person who expects to speak with you in that language at least once a week, I think that's a simple and really important goal for people.
Okay, thank you very much. I do agree that it's very important to speak from the very beginning, and actually it's the main point why most people learn languages, and is why I really believe that. Thank you very much for your time, and it was very interesting. And then have a nice day. Thank you.
You too. Thanks a lot.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.